Good afternoon, DDP. It's nice to be back here. Nice to be back here in Tucson. You'd have to be pretty much brain dead, I think, or totally disconnected from print, electronic, radio and television media, social media, and actual real human contact media, not to know that juries have awarded several cancer patients $80 million to $1 billion apiece for compensatory and punitive damages. The awards are based on claims that the active ingredient in Roundup weed killer caused their cancer. And Bayer Monsanto is responsible because it manufactured the chemical and supposedly failed to let consumers know that it's allegedly carcinogenic. You'd have to be just as disconnected to have encountered, not to have encountered, radio, TV, print, and online ads proclaiming that if you ever use Roundup and you now have cancer, you could be the next jackpot justice winner. And here's an actual typical dialing for dollars, ambulance chasing for plaintiffs, jackpot justice ad. Were you or a loved one ever exposed to the weed killer Roundup, and did you develop non-Hodgkin lymphoma, or NHL? Several juries have already awarded billions of dollars to people who were exposed to Roundup and later developed non-Hodgkin lymphoma. To receive your settlement, you must not delay, or you may miss the statute of limitations deadline for your case. We charge no fees unless we win. Recent verdicts in the billions of dollars make it likely we can settle your case for significant compensation. If you were exposed to Roundup and developed NHL or any of its many related forms of cancer, get a free case evaluation to see if you qualify for compensation by contacting us now. Well, as I just noted, the first 4 lucky winners received $80 million to $1 billion per person for their cancers. And maybe even more incredible, there are over 13,000 more potential corporate victims waiting in the sidelines, working with mass tort jackpot justice lawyers around the country. And all of them are essentially saying, I've got cancer, and it's not my bad luck. It's someone's fault, and Monsanto is going to pay. So imagine $80 million to $1 billion times 13,000, and pretty soon you're talking about real money, trillions of dollars to be exact. And these lawyers are just getting started. Bayer will be bankrupted. The important product will be driven right out of existence, and other products and companies will soon be in their crosshairs. It's no wonder one of the judges says the company should just settle the cases for a mere $5 billion or so. But either way, the lawyers are going to get about half of all these damage results. All that money. Of course, if you're relying on the mainstream drive-by media or on Twitter and Facebook and Google and things like that, and which now try to algorithm ban skeptical articles that doubt this cancer link with Monsanto's product, you're going to have missed all the articles that show that this cancer link with Roundup is just garbage. I'm going to discuss what's going on here, how this all got started, what kind of pseudoscience is behind it, and how even our courts are now helping to destroy companies, technologies, honest science, and real justice in this country. But first, let me make one thing perfectly clear. I do feel for these cancer patients. My daughter survived leukemia, and I know too many people who've had brain and blood and other cancers. They're all awful. I wish we could find a solution to all of them, a cure, a vaccination, whatever it's going to take. I don't see that coming, but it would be nice. But that's not the issue here. What these greedy lawyers and plaintiffs' clients are doing is destructive. It needs to be understood and stopped. Let me look at how this got started and where it's going now, where it is right now, and where it's heading in the next couple of years. We're at Fraud 101, science fraud. The chemical in question is glyphosate, the active ingredient in Roundup. It's now generic, but its original manufacturer was Monsanto, which is now a division of Bayer Corporation, the giant German company, which must be really wondering why it spent $66 billion 3 years ago to buy Monsanto. Not a good idea. Glyphosate was introduced way back in 1974. It's licensed in 130 different countries. It's the world's most widely used herbicide. It kills weeds. And millions of homeowners, including myself, have used it regularly, so have millions of farmers. Thousands of farmers employ it with Roundup-ready corn, soybeans, cotton, and other crops that are genetically engineered to be resistant to Roundup. That enables farmers to practice no-till farming, which means a couple spray treatments eliminate the need to till cropland or use stoop labor to control weeds. That preserves soil structure and organisms, moisture, organic matter, and nutrients. It improves drainage and soil biodiversity, and it reduces erosion. It permits the high-yield farming that humanity has to practice if we're going to feed Earth's growing populations without having to plow under millions of acres of additional wildlife habitat. Farmers also like it, says cancer epidemiologist Jeffrey Cabot, because it's safe to use. Glyphosate is environmentally benign and has low toxicity. In fact, Cabot says the acute toxicity of glyphosate is lower than that of table salt, vinegar, chocolate, or coffee. Multiple studies by respected organizations worldwide have concluded that glyphosate is safe and non-carcinogenic. Reviewers include the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, the European Food Safety Authority, the European Chemicals Agency, Food and Agricultural Organization of the UN, Germany's Institute for Risk Assessment, Health Canada, Australia's Pesticides and Veterinary Medicines Authority, and many others. There was a U.S. agricultural health study conducted by the National Cancer Institute. It followed and continues to follow the health of 54,000 farmers and pesticide applicators for over 2 decades. It has found no glyphosate cancer link. The study is ongoing. It's by far the most extensive such analysis ever conducted. And indeed, there are over 3,000 studies that support glyphosate safety and give it a clean bill of health. Only one agency, the France-based International Agency for Cancer Research, or IARC, says otherwise. And its conclusions are based on 8 studies, some of which it manipulated to get the results that it wanted. IARC is a World Health Organization agency, but it does no research of its own. It simply reviews other research and classifies chemicals as definitely, probably, or possibly carcinogenic, or simply as not classifiable. To reach its conclusions, the agency relies on what toxicity experts call exposure tests. And this is an antiquated approach that uses lab animals to determine whether a chemical might cause cancer. Generally, it's often at ridiculously high levels of exposure that no animal or human would or could ever encounter in the real world. IARC pointedly refuses to rely on actual risk assessments. This approach examines the exposure level at which a substance might actually have an adverse effect on laboratory animals. That's the modern approach. It's actually useful to people who regulate and use chemicals of various kinds. In fact, some chemicals may cause cancer or other problems at extremely high doses, but be completely harmless at the doses you're normally going to encounter. And other substances may be harmful at high doses, but beneficial or even vital at low doses. Not having them in our bodies at those low doses can cause severe health problems. IARC's Group 1 carcinogens, definitely carcinogenic, its highest likelihood of cancer category, means high-level exposure studies found sufficient evidence of carcinogenicity in humans. There are 130 chemicals in this and substances in this category. This group includes plutonium in sunlight, fine, along with aflatoxin, asbestos, benzene, cadmium, lindane, tobacco, industrial processes like welding and steel making, and processed meats. IARC's Group 2 carcinogens, probably carcinogenic, means that exposure studies found limited evidence of carcinogenicity in humans, plus sufficient evidence of carcinogenicity in lab animals. There are 85 of these. And here we do find glyphosate, along with dieldrin and malathion acetaldehyde in bread, anabolic steroids, emissions from high-temperature food frying, red meat, working as a hairdresser in a refinery, or at night shifts that disrupt our circadian rhythm, and drinking very hot beverages. And then there's the group 2B carcinogens, which are possibly carcinogenic. That means limited evidence of carcinogenicity exists for humans, plus less than sufficient evidence of carcinogenicity in animals. And there are 210 in this category. This group includes chlordane, cobalt, diesel fuel, and malathion, as well as bracken ferns, pickled vegetables, carpentry work, and caffeic acid in coffee, tea, apples, blueberries, broccoli, and kale. Since 1971, IARC has studied over 1,000 substances and identified more than 400 that it says could cause cancer in humans. And of course, none of their studies, because of the way they conduct them, provides any useful public health risk management information. But, goodness, what a great mother load of targets it provides for these activists and lawyers who want to stoke fear, file billion-dollar lawsuits against deep-pocket manufacturers, ban chemicals, and destroy companies. They might not want to target makers of organic coffee, because organics are part of their package of allies, or very hot beverages makers. There are not too many deep pockets right there, but companies that manufacture, sell, or use asbestos, tobacco, or glyphosate. Wow, there's a great bunch of targets. And if chicanery, corruption, and fraud are necessary to nail glyphosate and Roundup, so be it from their perspective. IARC based its glyphosate causes cancer finding on supposed evidence from rodent studies. However, subsequent reviews by epidemiologist Jeffrey Cabot, National Cancer Institute statistician Robert Tyrone, investigative journalist Kate Kelland, risk monger Dr. David Zarek, and other investigators have demonstrated that the IARC process was tainted beyond repair right from the very beginning. IARC's glyphosate review was proposed by U.S. government statistician Christopher Portier, who then helped design the study, and then he served as special advisor to IARC, to the working group for IARC that was evaluating the chemical that he proposed they study. And he did all of this while he was also being paid as an advisor to the very anti-chemical Environmental Defense Fund, and he was serving as a litigation consultant to two law firms that were preparing to sue for glyphosate. He was working on, quote, quote, other issues for them, but it included the glyphosate work. And then just 3 days after IARC issued its cancer finding, Portier signed a contract to receive $160,000 for serving as an outright litigation consultant for those law firms. And he's now serving as a well-paid expert witness in the lawsuits. So Portier and IARC tried to cover up all these blatant conflicts of interest. They weren't successful, but in the end, those conflicts of interest meant nothing whatsoever, it seems, to the juries or the judges involved in handling these cases, or to the mainstream media that are covering them. Dr. Tyrone discovered that during its deliberations, the IARC panel highlighted carcinogenic results from its rodent studies, while ignoring contradictory no cancer results from the very same studies. And overall, he says that data do not support the agency's claim that glyphosate is carcinogenic. If that's their own data from the 8 studies they chose to select out of the 3,000 plus that were out there on Roundup. Dr. Cabot says IARC had to cherry pick results from 2 mouse studies in order to make its very tortured case, that's his term, that animal evidence supported a conclusion of carcinogenicity. Kate Kellen found 10 instances where a negative conclusion about glyphosate leading to tumors was either deleted or replaced with a neutral or positive statement between the draft and final versions of the IARC report. Portier himself admitted the animal studies subgroup report, which concluded limited evidence of carcinogenicity, somehow got upgraded to sufficient evidence by the time they got to their final report. And just as disturbing, the chair of IARC's glyphosate working group was also a senior investigator for this agricultural health study by the Cancer Institute. And he knew the study results totally exonerated glyphosate as a carcinogen. However, he didn't inform his colleagues about those results on the spurious ground that the results had not been formally published. But part of the reason they hadn't been formally published is he was dragging his feet on getting them published by the organization. So that was also pretty duplicitous. And he admits that had those studies been available to IARC, they would have altered IARC's decision. You could even call IARC the Theranos of cancer research, Theranos being the fraudulent blood banking company that went from a $56 billion valuation 6 months later down to below zero for fraud. There's a lot more, of course, but we just don't have time to cover all of that. Bottom line is that IARC and its allies ignored or denied most of these charges. They excused what they couldn't ignore or deny, and they launched vicious attacks against any of their critics, trying to shut them up, demonize them, taint their evidence. And that brings us to Fraud 202, corruption and fraud right in our courtrooms. As I said, the glyphosate lawsuits are based on claims that the chemical causes cancer, and Bayer Monsanto knew this, but deliberately or negligently withheld that information from its Roundup users. I'd say if the allegations are correct, compensatory and even punitive damages would be proper and justified. However, what is reasonable damages, in my mind, doesn't mean $80 million to $1 billion per cancer patient. As I just explained, extensive, reputable evidence clearly demonstrates there is no connection between glyphosate use and lymphomas or other cancers. And other reputable evidence reveals extensive fraud and corruption behind the IARC ruling that is the foundation for all of these lawsuits, the jury awards, and indeed this entire mega litigation program. The first award went to Dwayne Johnson. He was a groundskeeper for 18 months and said he got drenched twice by glyphosate, but never washed off any of the chemical, as any normal user of any chemical would do, nor did he ever seek any medical attention. Second, $80 million award went to Edwin Hardeman, who used Roundup for years in his backyard. The third awards of $1 billion apiece went to Alberta Piliot and his wife Alva, who also used Roundup for a number of years. Hardeman's 47 years old. Johnson is 47, Hardeman is 70, and the Piliots are in their mid to late 70s. That's important down the road in a couple of minutes when I talk about their cases. Plaintiff attorneys repeatedly hammered on IARC's cancer claims, repeatedly attacked Monsanto as a callous corporation, and repeatedly did all they could to prejudice and inflame the juries and news media. In all of this, they were aided by years of anti-chemical, anti-corporate media, social media, Hollywood, and activist campaigns that set the stage for these enormous jury awards and for the trial judges to mostly let the jackpot justice lawyers get away with their very clever, deceptive, manipulative tactics. In the Hardeman case, federal district court judge Vincent Chavria strictly limited any defense attorney or witness discussion of the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency's analysis and conclusions about glyphosate being safe. EPA's select team of scientists appointed particularly to look at this particular chemical had reviewed numerous studies from all over the world and concluded that glyphosate is not likely to be carcinogenic in humans. But the judge refused to let Monsanto's attorneys discuss this. He said he wanted to avoid wasting time or misleading the jury, because the primary inquiry is what the scientific studies show and not what EPA concluded they show. So we let Hardeman's lawyers drone on about what IARC concluded its carefully selected studies showed that they hadn't done themselves. And he barred defense lawyers from talking about what hundreds or even thousands of other studies showed exonerating glyphosate and Roundup. He shut down discussion of evidence that contradicted them, exonerated Roundup because he felt letting the juries know about those studies would confuse or mislead them. He also barred Monsanto and Bayer from discussing conclusions reached by foreign regulators such as Health Canada. Health Canada said it left no stone unturned in evaluating glyphosate, but it found no likely cancer risk and said no pesticide regulatory authority in the world currently considers glyphosate to be a cancer risk to humans at the levels at which humans are currently exposed. That to me should be dispositive, but it clearly wasn't. So we have IARC engaging in great deceptions, revisions, collusion, data manipulation, and exclusion of exculpatory evidence to reach its conclusion that glyphosate is carcinogenic. It does no studies of its own, same as EPA, which also reviews studies by other organizations. And IARC is the same agency that concludes you can get cancer from working the night shift, eating red and processed meats, drinking hot beverages, and even ingesting trace amounts of allegedly carcinogenic substances found in alcoholic beverages, bread, broccoli, and blueberries. But the judge let IARC's conclusions stand and get paraded before the jury over and over, while barring almost all the exculpatory evidence. To me, it was a travesty and kangaroo court justice. In the Johnson case, Judge Suzanne Bolanos let supposed expert witnesses were paid rather handsomely for the testimony state that it was possible that even Dwayne Johnson's short 18-month stint as a groundskeeper and user of glyphosate could have caused his cancer. It was highly unlikely, perhaps one chance in a million or less, if you consider all the does not cause cancer evidence. But it was possible, and that's all the jury needed to hear. So, in the end, inflamed and misled and riled up by years of anti-chemical, anti-corporate campaigns, I think it was easy for the jurors to simply rule that the Bayer and Monsanto were guilty and hand out those massive awards. They had the same thing happen in spades in the Piliad trial. So let's look at this courtroom proceeding from another angle, an approach I think I would have taken if I had been the Bayer-Monsanto attorney. Here's an additional line of questioning I would have pursued. Can you describe your family cancer history, your eating, exercise, and sleeping habits, how much you eat high-fat foods, how often you eat fruits and vegetables, and your other lifestyle choices that doctors and other experts now know play significant roles in whether or not people get cancer? How many times in your 47, 70, 75, or 77-year lifespans were you exposed to substances on IARC's Group 1 definite carcinogens list, including sunlight, acetaldehyde in alcoholic beverages, aflatoxin in peanuts, asbestos, cadmium in batteries, lindane, or any of the other 125 other substances and activities in Group 1? Have you ever smoked or been exposed to secondhand smoke? How often have you eaten bacon, sausage, or other processed meats? How many times have you been exposed to any of IARC's Group 2 probable human carcinogens, not just glyphosate, but also anabolic steroids, creosote, diazinon, dieldrin, malathion, emissions from high-temperature food frying, shift work, or any of the 75 other substances and activities in Group 2A? How often have you consumed beef, pork, or very hot beverages? How many times have you been exposed to any of IARC's Group 2B possible human carcinogens, including bracken ferns, chlordane, diesel fuel, fumonisin, inorganic lead, low-frequency magnetic fields, malathion, parathion, titanium oxide in white paint, pickled vegetables, caffeic acid in coffee, tea, apples, broccoli, kale, and other fruits and vegetables, or any of the 200 other substances in the 2B list? I think those are all very relevant questions. And in view of all that, please explain how you, your doctors, your lawyers, and your other experts concluded that none of your family history, none of your lifestyle choices, none of your exposure to dozens or even hundreds of other substances on IARC's list of carcinogens caused or contributed to your cancer, and that your cancer is due solely to your exposure to glyphosate. Or put another way, can you explain exactly how you and your experts separated and quantified all these various exposures and lifestyle decisions and concluded that Roundup was the sole reason you got cancer, and all these other hundreds of factors played no role whatsoever? But as best I can tell, Monsanto's lawyers didn't ask those questions, or they were prevented from asking them. And in granting these cancer victims those massive punitive damage awards, the jurors had to decide that Monsanto had engaged in conduct with malice, oppression, or fraud by one or more of its officers, directors, or managers. That's a pretty high bar, I think. But with the way the trial appears to have been conducted by mass tort legal teams and presided over by these judges, it looks like it was a pretty easy slam dunk for the jurors. To me, it's bad enough that these cancer trials were driven by emotional appeals to jurors' largely misplaced fears of chemicals and minimal knowledge of chemicals, chemical risks, medicine, and cancer. It's far worse than our courts let these lawsuits be driven also by fraud and misconduct by IARC and plaintiff lawyers. And from my perch, these trials just turned into mob justice, a modern-day corporate lynching presided over by judges who functioned almost like incompetent or crooked referees in a football game. To me, it's a sorry state of affairs for our country, and I hope we can rescue ourselves. So we come to Fraud 303, the next stages of jackpot justice fraud. What we're facing, I think, is a litigation Tyrannosaurus Rex, the ultimate predator legal system preparing to devour Bayer Monsanto and other corporations alive. It's grown from dangerous raptors that cut their teeth on tobacco and asbestos. It's now far bigger and stronger teeth, strategies, skills, technologies, alliances, financing, and ability to capitalize on previous victories make it one of the biggest threats our corporations, technologies, legal system, and society have ever faced. This T-Rex legal system is incredibly well fed on hordes of cash from ultra-rich predatory law firms and lawyers, far-left foundations, and organic food companies, U.S. citizens whose taxes fund IARC and these allied agencies, people who support public interest law firms, and I use that term loosely, public interest activist groups, and slimy law firm devised investor groups. This is an amazing thing to me. They have investor groups where people can put money into the pot to pay for all the preparations for the trials in the hopes that they're going to be able to share in part of these billion-dollar judgments. The money also goes to big game hunting expeditions to find the next corporate victims, to friendly scientists and pressure groups that help IARC prepare its next definitive monograph, proving yet another chemical is carcinogenic, to a small army of social media contacts and experts who actually get out there and mobilize millions of citizens and agitators to attack companies and various chemicals and set up and attack the defenders who might come to try to exonerate the chemicals under attack. And they also go spend millions of dollars electing allied legislators and judges or securing the appointment of judges in our legal system. They're aided as well by the Ramazzini Institute in Italy and the National Institute of Environmental Health Sciences, or NIEHS, right here in the USA, and both of them are taxpayer funded. As Dr. Zarek notes, the jackpot justice predatory lawyers even create, finance, and coordinate their own so-called public interest think tanks and education groups like the Council for Education and Research on Toxics, or CERT. These groups work with their various allies, dominate print, television, and online media, and coordinate with anti-chemical pressure groups like Pesticide Action Network, the Corporate Europe Observatory, Some of Us, U.S. Right to Know, and of course, Greenpeace. The mainstream media rarely report anything that might support Monsanto or other corporate interests in these cases, and Google and social media make it hard to find supportive media online or use their algorithms to help make pro-industry, to match one pro-industry article with a dozen that are attacking the industry. Serious money also goes to online and street thugs who stand ready to publicize the home addresses of recalcitrant legislators, regulators, scientists, and judges, and harass them online, in the media, in front of their homes, in restaurants, and even at their kids' schools. They have no scruples, and many of these groups have no codes of conduct or ethics. Together they conduct brilliant, vicious, years-long take-no-prisoner campaigns to instill fear of chemicals, hatred of corporations, and visions of vengeance at their hands or through juries. Ultimately, and above all, they're determined to impose legislation, corporate elimination, and social change on a monumental scale through confrontation, intimidation, and litigation. And of course, all of this further enriches and empowers the people involved. Bayer Monsanto and its legal team must feel that the massive T-Rex smells their blood and is preparing to rip them out of their little safari car. I get the sense they've given up on getting any kind of a fair shake in the district courts and juries. And they're pinning all their hopes on reviews and reversals by appellate courts or the U.S. Supreme Court. They can certainly show they were precluded from presenting an adequate defense. They can certainly demonstrate that IARC's cancer claims were the product of fraud and collusion. At the very least, they can show IARC's claims are contradicted by literally thousands of other studies from all over the world that found glyphosate is not likely to be carcinogenic to humans. And they can certainly cite Daubert versus Merrill Dow Pharmaceuticals. This is a 1993 U.S. Supreme Court case. The decision requires that in cases like this Monsanto case, plaintiffs have to prove that the scientific evidence they present is relevant and reliable. It must have been tested and peer-reviewed against accepted standards. It must be accepted in the applicable scientific community, and it must meet basic standards of honesty, integrity, and credibility. I think the IARC carcinogen claims are such an outlier, so beneath scientific norms, so tainted by conflicts of interest and misconduct, and so unrelated to actual chemical risks, you could even say they're deceptive and fraudulent, should never have been presented or admitted as evidence in these glyphosate trials. I would think the Supreme Court would have to agree and apply Daubert to reverse these jury decisions and damage awards. But sometimes we have to look at Chief Justice John Roberts, who seems too often ready to side with the liberal justices on the court if he feels outside pressure or media campaigns against him. So I wouldn't bank on counting on the Supreme Court. So what's next? Who's going to be the next T-Rex law firm business under attack? One is almost certainly going to be General Mills and other food companies that haven't yet forsworn conventionally grown or biotech grains and are still selling products that have detectable levels of glyphosate. We're already seeing the first waves of those attacks on the internet and elsewhere. This all revolves around the linear no-threshold nonsense that we're all familiar with, coupled with these lawsuits and damage awards that precede them and more campaigns to terrify children and parents about synthetic chemicals in their food. They're doing all this by declaring that experts have linked these chemicals to cancer, autism, obesity, leaky gut, celiac disease, endocrine disruption, and almost any allergy that consumers might encounter today. We're talking about detecting parts per billion or even parts per trillion in those cereal products and other products, and saying these barely detectable trace contaminants are causing all these afflictions. So bear in mind, 1 ppb, 1 part per billion, is equivalent to 1 second in 32 years, or 50 drops of bad stuff in an official Olympic-sized swimming pool. That's 2 teaspoons and 660,000 gallons of water. If you go into parts per trillion, you're talking about 1 second in 32,000 years, or 50 drops in 1,000 Olympic swimming pools, or 660 million, or 2 teaspoons in 660 million gallons of water. Incredibly minuscule. Of course, I think 2 could play this game if we wanted to. So how about we go test some of the organic foods for the nasty chemicals and pesticides that organic farmers use, and see about detectable trace amounts in all those organic foods. So this comes from Dr. Zarek's Organic Farming Dirty Dozen. Prolonged or repeated ingestion of boron fertilizer residues can affect human brains, livers, and hearts. Pyrethrin, natural organic pesticides, are powerful neurotoxins that have been found to cause leukemia. Copper sulfate, used as an organic fungicide and in many other applications with organic farmers, can cause damage to the human brain, liver, kidneys, and stomach and intestinal linings. Lime sulfur, a mildew and insect killer, is extremely caustic. It causes irreversible eye damage and can be fatal if it's inhaled, swallowed, or absorbed through the skin. Rotenone, it's a highly toxic, even deadly organic pesticide that's sometimes combined with pyrethrins, making it even more toxic, and can enhance the onset of Parkinson's disease. Nicotine sulfate is an organic neurotoxin. It interferes with nerve and muscle transmissions, causes abnormalities in lab animal offspring, and can lead to increased blood pressure levels, irregular heart rates, and even death in organic gardeners. And then there's the mycotoxin fumonisin. It's been linked to esophageal cancer in adults and to neural tube defects like spinal bifida in developing fetuses. It occurs because organic corn crops are more susceptible to corn borers and thus to fungal contamination. And some organic corn meals have been tested at 18 to 32 times above safety standards for fumonisin. So maybe it's the organic foods these people were eating that caused their cancer. Well, just asking, just saying. Do you suppose any of these chemicals, these dangerous chemicals and substances used by organic farmers, have been tested or attacked by the Pesticide Action Network or Greenpeace or the predatory lawyers in their media lapdogs? I don't think so. Quo vadis, where are we going? Where is all this taking us? Even as we speak, the T-Rex ultimate predator lawyers are gearing up to go after neonic pesticides and intensify their attacks on benzene. Advanced technology, neonicotinoids are the world's most widely used insecticide class today. About 90% are used as seed coatings for corn, wheat, canola, soybeans, cotton, and other crops. They're absorbed into the plant tissue to protect plants against damage by effectively targeting only the pests that actually feed on the crops, leaving the rest alone. That makes them very safe for humans, bees, birds, other animals, and non-target pests. Benzene occurs naturally in crude oil, and it's used primarily as an intermediate chemical. Ethylbenzene, for example, it becomes a precursor to styrene and polymers and plastics. Cumene for rosins and adhesives. Cyclohexane for nylon fibers and other products. Benzene was very recently classified as an IARC Group 1 definite human carcinogen. so it allegedly causes leukemia in workers who have been exposed to very large concentrations of this chemical. But emails between American scientists, tort lawyers, and the former head of IARC's monograph cancer study unit reveals how these jackpot lawyers have been helping to determine not just which chemicals IARC is going to study, but how often they're going to study them so that the lawyers get the results they want. They want to make sure the IARC studies are going to hold up in court so that their suits will be successful. And once again, we've got Dr. Zarek to thank, this time for his damning Benzene Bastards series of articles. They show how IARC colluded actively with trial lawyers to get benzene listed as a Group 1 carcinogen so that the lawyers could prepare their lawsuits. The IARC glyphosate and cancer benzene monographs really follow the same playbook. And IARC's directors are fully aware just how they did this. And they're complicit in this. It's all designed to be working with the lawyers. And the directors, the lawyers, the agency, all understand this game plan and they seem happy with it. So IARC prepared its first monograph on benzene, but it only found limited carcinogenicity likelihoods. The lawyers didn't like that. They went back to IARC and said, can you do another report? So IARC did, but they still didn't link the benzene and cancer sufficiently to satisfy the lawyers. So the lawyers lobbied harder through some of their American scientist friends and persuaded the agency to gin up one more study. And finally, IARC determined that, in its opinion, benzene is a class 1 human carcinogen. So now they're lining up thousands of cases for benzene victims so that the lawyers can go after both chemical and oil companies. So here we are. Litigation, anarchy reigns supreme. One company, industry, and chemical after another is being lined up, sued, and brought down. And let the chips fall where they may. Eliminating glyphosate is going to mean no more Roundup, no more no-till farming, far fewer GMO crops. It'll mean weeding again with stoop labor, maybe using immigrant kids. Certainly not using the lawyers' kids to do stoop labor and weed the gardens and so forth. The big organic folks will then take over with their natural chemicals, plowing millions more acres of wildlife habitat under to grow fewer crops at higher prices on millions more acres more land. On the world stage, wiping out Roundup is likely going to mean more malnutrition and starvation in the third world countries that will be forced to continue using traditional subsistence, primitive farming methods. Destroy neonics, and farmers will have to use synthetic and organic insecticides that definitely are harmful to bees and humans and other wildlife. Destroy benzene, and hundreds of products are just going to disappear. So thanks to these vicious, well-funded mainstream and social media campaigns and the takeover of our schools, as we've been discussing in other institutions, we've got a very gullible and ignorant public that believes we can always find alternatives for any products and companies that are driven off the face of the earth. Or we can just import the products from China after we've destroyed still more American companies and industries and jobs. Is there any hope for U.S. manufacturers, for the United States? Will the Supreme Court or Congress or the Trump administration step up and halt this destructive anarchist insanity? I wish I had some answers, but I don't. So I'm just going to put my faith in the Supreme Court and hope Justice Roberts will see wisdom, maybe even a couple of those left more liberal justices on the court will realize what's at stake here and how they really have to come to the defense of science and justice in our courtrooms. Otherwise, we're going to be up the creek. And with that happy note, I'll conclude and take questions if you have any.